Anyhow, as I started to say, some of you already know this about the dragonfly, but that is my symbol, because it does stand for transformation. That goes from a water creature to an airborne creature. They've been around from prehistoric times, and they are very, they look very fragile, but obviously they're very strong. And that's the transformation I want for everybody who attends one of my programs or works with me, whether individually or in a group. So without further ado, I'll just introduce myself to some of you who don't know me. I've been a licensed clinical social worker for more than 40 years. I keep thinking I'm much too young to have these things happen, but yeah. And then I also am, as it says, a reinvention coach. I help people reinvent their lives to create a life that they love. So I'd like to know, before I get started with what I'm presenting, if anybody is willing to share what about this title made you decide to come today, because you are giving up your time. So is there anything in particular?
I'll say something.
Sure.
Being that I'm in the communication field for a job, I know how important communication is, and it is a failing art. So that's why I was interested in hearing what you had to say, because people just don't communicate now like they used to. They just don't.
That's very true.
That's my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I just attended a training on different generational, working with different generations. And I hadn't really thought about it, but it makes such a difference. I mean, people nowadays, what they communicate mainly by texting, right? And haven't you had the experience of being in a restaurant and you look around and everybody's on their phone and they're not even interacting with the people they're sitting at the table with? Yeah, it's very odd. Yeah, I'm kind of going back to let's talk. This is what this covers. This is what this is covering, really. It's not on how to text better. It's on how to communicate better. So, yeah, and really learning how to listen and respond to each other. Anybody else want to say anything about what else they're hoping to get out of it?
Trudy, this
Hi,
is
Trudy.
Lorelai. Oh,
Go ahead, Lorelai.
yeah. I just wanted to say, particularly in this election year, people have stopped listening to each other, and the battlegrounds, the battle lines are so appalling, and people just need to start to listen. And that's what I'm hoping today, to find out some ways of reducing the tensions and the things when people get together, and helping everybody learn to listen to each other more.
Okay, very good, Lorelai. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I plan to be addressing that. Of course, in an hour, can't go deep, but I want to expose you guys to some different things that you can actually use immediately.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else ready to share, or should we go on? I think somebody started to talk. Was that you, Ashley or Shay? Did you start to talk?
It was, but you know what? I think Lorelai said it beautifully, so I'm going to pass.
Okay, gotcha. All righty. So one of the things first is to be aware of conflicts and what starts conflicts, so that we can figure out what to do about it. So as you see, this is kind of a scale on assertiveness and on cooperativeness. Assertiveness is where you're just focusing on your own needs, desires, agenda. Like Lorelai was saying, everybody seems to have this agenda. And cooperative, of course, is when you can focus on other people's needs and mutual relationships. So what I'd like you to do is kind of just think about yourself. Where do you see yourself on this scale? And I'd also like you to maybe just choose one person whom you've been really wanting to resolve, be able to talk with better, to kind of resolve the conflicts, and kind of think about where do you see them on the scale. So just, you don't have to, I'm not outing anybody. You can just kind of look and see where you think people are, where you are, and where you're, I'm going to call it your main teacher, because that is how we learn. We learn when we have the person who we have the most conflict with is actually the one we need to learn the most from. which I know can be a little startling. Okay, everybody have their spot? Okay, so now we're going to go on to conflict styles, and I want you to think again as I go through these, which little animal reflects you and which one reflects a person or team or whatever you're trying to communicate with. So we've got the competing type of conflict style, right? And that's the person who takes charge and might makes right. How do you think that they can be, but this does have some positive. What, anybody care to guess what the positive is? Well, has anybody watched, I'm from Chicago, in case you can't tell from my accent. Anybody like to watch Chicago Fire besides me? I like to watch Chicago Fire. So if it's an emergency or you're in the armed forces, what do you think? Do people need to debate, or do people just need to give orders and other people have to obey? Right? So it's very positive way of communicating when quick action is needed, especially in an emergency. Can you imagine when you're, there's a fire and they're saying, the lieutenant saying, well, who would like to volunteer to have the hose, or who would like to go inside the house? I mean, there's always somebody directing, do this, do that. And that comes in really handy when quick action is needed, and it's good in an emergency. I would imagine, though, that a lot of you were thinking, what's the negatives of this style? Anybody care to share?
You can come off as a bully or aggressive as opposed to assertive, because you make decisions without really getting feedback or other people's opinions.
Right. Good. Now you're Shay.
I'm Shay.
You're Shay. Okay. Thank you, Shay. Yeah. Yeah. Because it comes across that you don't really care about other people's feelings and relationships. Right. So relationships aren't important. We're just going to get the task done or whatever. It's kind of my way or the highway. So again, does this fit, who you're thinking about or somebody that you know? Okay. So there are, we need to look at what's the positives and the negatives of every conflict style. This one, though, is more or less a win-lose situation. Okay. So what about the avoider, who is represented by the turtle? Can anybody relate to that? What do you think are the positives of this type of style? Anyone? Okay, well, it's really helpful when you're in a dangerous situation, either emotionally, or physically, but we're really dealing with emotions here. So sometimes the conflict is just so high, you need time to cool down so that you can express yourself. When our emotions are high, we operate from the back of our brain, which is the survival. And this is what conflicts bring out. It brings out our reptilian brain, where we're not thinking very clearly and we can say things we wish we hadn't. So sometimes it's really good just to walk away, cool down. But sometimes if you're more of an avoider, you don't deal with any conflict. And this is not a good long-term solution, because you don't give your opinion even when it matters. So a lot of people who tend to be people pleasers can also be avoiders. And what I mean by people pleasers is you just don't want to have any conflict, so you keep giving in. Okay, so again, can anybody relate to this? Do you think this is your type of how you handle conflict, or perhaps the person you're dealing with handles conflict? Because if you're dealing with an avoider, then you can't get anything resolved either. So here's the compromising fox. What do people think about compromising? That's what do you think of that as a conflict resolution style? Kate's nodding. I can see she's nodding. Okay. So compromising seems like a good idea. And it can be. Anybody else? Anybody feel like they compromise a lot, either at home or at work? Okay. All right, well, feel free to jump in. We don't need, hold up hands, but anyhow, what do you think, Kate, since you were nodding and you're on video, what do you think are the advantages of the compromise?
I think you get input from both sides to solve a problem.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So you get more buy-in.
Get more buy-in. Okay. Yeah, and I see Shay kind of nodding her head too. Okay. So Lorelei and Pam, you're off the hook because I can't see you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Trudy. This is Lorelei, but I lost the visual with you and I'm trying to get it back.
Okay. All right. I think we, okay. And so anyhow, yeah, if a decision needs to be made in a timely manner and both parties are willing to give up something, this can be a helpful way to resolve things. What are the negatives about this kind of? Anyone?
Well, you may always be the one that's given up and giving in to the other person. So
Yeah, you might be the, yeah.
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 And that's not always fair, but sometimes that's what happens.
Yeah. And like,
I think, I'm sorry, Trudy, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I think sometimes, compromise and we think, oh, that's good. We'll split the difference. We'll meet halfway. That's a good thing. And if everybody kind of gives a little bit, everybody goes away sort of happy. Like you have to understand, if you're going to compromise, you're not going to be ecstatic when you walk away because you're going to have to give up a little bit. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely, Shay.
But you're not going to be as satisfied.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And it can be very time consuming to find a solution that pleases everyone, but is exactly what Shay was saying. This is actually a lose-lose way of handling conflicts because everybody's giving up something. And as Shay just said, you might not walk away happy. It might get, okay, we solved this problem, but you still gave up something. And there's times though that's what's necessary, right? So again, think of who you're working with, who you're dealing with, and who does this a lot. Accommodating is similar. And I think it was said, you might give up too much, and that's what the accommodator does. Anybody can think of the reason though that this is different than the compromiser?
I tend to give in because I don't like conflict, and I'm definitely an avoider. And it may be that I do care, but at a point where it just doesn't seem important to care anymore. But yet I know what I do care about over the long term cumulatively adds up to the point that I'm miserable.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Pam. Yeah. So that can happen with the avoider. It can also happen with the accommodator. So, if you care more about the other person than the issue, and sometimes people decide that, like my relationship is more important.
Right.
But if you can become resentful, if you don't ever give your opinion, as Pam was saying, and sometimes you cooperate at your own expense because your goals and objectives are never met.
That's mine.
And we are going to get to the battle and learning conversations. I just wanted to lay some groundwork here about how this works. Okay. So what about collaborating? The wise owl. So what are the positives with this? And what do you think is the difference between collaboration and compromise?
I think both parties can feel that they're being heard with their opinion or ideas. So it's more like you have on there, it's a collaborative effort. instead of my way's the right way, your way's the wrong way. You know, it's more of an idea seeking collaborative, united front, in my opinion.
Okay, right? Yeah. And this, I think, is what Lorelei might have been referring to as kind of missing these days, right?
Yes.
So the positives is that everybody gets their thoughts and feelings out. They reframe challenges. They provide space for everyone's ideas. What do you think the negatives can be, though? Because every style has the positives and the negatives.
This is very time consuming.
Yep, you got it, Shay. This is very time consuming. So it's certainly not worth it on small issues. And it also requires a high degree of trust. So unless you have that kind of trust, this is not the way to go. But yeah, it's mainly the time consuming. If we can do it, though, it is definitely a win-win as opposed to the compromiser, which is actually a lose-lose. So where on this chart do you think the shark belongs? Between assertiveness and cooperativeness.
Wait, I thought you muted us.
Oh, the shark would be the high X on the assertiveness scale.
Yep, that's where your shark is. Okay. Where do you think the turtle would be?
Bottom far right
The far right for cooperativeness?
for cooperativeness,
Okay.
maybe.
I could see why you think so. But actually the turtle is here. If they don't express their opinion and they avoid, they don't even get a chance to talk,
Oh, okay.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
gotcha.
Yeah. All right. So what about the compromiser? Where would he go? The fox. Bless you.
Thank you.
Maybe went, as you look at assertiveness and cooperativeness, where do you think the fox would go?
Right in the middle.
Very good, Lisa. Yep, right in the middle.
Really?
Uh-huh. I know people don't think of us like this, but that is where they're in the middle range for assertiveness and for being cooperative. And this is important to, these are, I mean, obviously there's cute little animals involved here, but it's important for you to realize not only where you operate most of the time, but when you're dealing with someone else or another team or whatever, like if there's groups in your office or whatever, and you're trying to figure out or there's a leader, and then there's the staff, where people are, because this makes a difference with how you're going to move forward with the battle conversations and changing them to learning conversations. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. So where do you think the, let's see, the teddy bear?
I would say far right, the bottom.
Yes.
Yeah, it's because of.
Oh, gotcha,
Teddy
gotcha.
bear. Yep, that's where the teddy bear belongs. So cooperative, but not assertive at all. And yet, as we found out, they can get really resentful. It's not always the best way to resolve a conflict. There are times when all of these have their advantages, though, right? That's why I was showing you the positives and negatives. And sometimes we flip-flop from one to the other, but almost everybody has a preferred way of handling conflict. So obviously we've got the wise owl over there, because very cooperative and still assertive. Okay, expressing his or her own needs, but really eliciting other people's opinions, taking it as you know, as important, and then trying to come up with a solution that works for everybody. And have you ever noticed that when you're in a collaborative situation that you buy in to whatever decision has been made? That's when you buy in. Okay. And you know, I'm not sure we can do this on all situations. I don't think we're, you know, it would be great, I think, if we could collaborate with like in this milieu of all this election stuff. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's very helpful to just kind of know where everybody is and where you are and what you can do to improve. So we're going to look at the in a moment, we're going to look at the battle, how to change battle conversations to learning conversations. But what do you think is the one factor that makes a difference between damaging a relationship and deepening it? Anybody have an idea?
I think it's the ability to listen.
Okay. That's a big part of it, Lorelei. And when do you have, what's necessary in order to have the ability to listen?
I think
Would
that's
say
one of-
empathy.
It's what?
I said empathy, being empathetic.
Yeah, that definitely helps. And according to William James, the factor is attitude. And so, yes, are you willing, you know, are you willing to listen? Are you willing to have empathy? And I say, you know, both those things are skills that we can improve upon. Some people do it more naturally than others. It doesn't mean that it can't happen. Okay, so let's go with changing battles to learning conversations, the title of this talk. So there's 4 areas of conflict that often occur. And because of in each of these areas, we make assumptions and then we have a goal for our conversation. So what do you think the assumption is for knowledge in terms of a battle? Like when you're not willing to listen? Well, we often close ourselves out because we go, I know all that I need to know. I don't need to listen to you. I know everything, right? And what is our goal when we take that on?
to win.
Yep. To persuade them that I am right. Right? There's no listening there. How do we change that though? How do we change an assumption? Because an assumption is just something we assume is true. It doesn't necessarily make it true. But we have the ability to decide to make a different assumption. So what would aid in, you know, what would aid in that? Well, what if we just thought, oh, each of us is bringing different perceptions and information to the table? You know, hey, each of us has, you know, we have different living, you know, we live differently, we've seen different things, we have different backgrounds. Each of us is bringing something different to the table. Do you think if you had that attitude, you could, your goal for what you would engage in the conversation would be different? Yeah. So maybe the goal would be to really listen to each other, to explore each other's stories and understand the situation better. So do you see how by changing the assumption, the goal automatically changes, and therefore the battle can change to let's move on, let's learn something. So what about intentions? This is one that I talk to clients about all the time, right? We've all heard of the road to hell is paved by good intentions. What's a battle? What's the assumption? Hmm. Well, we basically think, I know what they intended, right? I know it. I know what they intended. And then when we think that, then we're like, huh, well, I have to let them know that what they thought and did was wrong.
Yeah.
But do you really know what anybody else intends? What if we made a different assumption? What could that assumption be? Okay. Who, you-
That they thought they were doing what was best.
okay. Yeah, and that's a nice way to look at it. We could, absolutely. But do you know even then that what they intended? But what do you know by what somebody does? You know how it impacts you. There is a huge difference between intention and impact. Haven't we been in like maybe an argument, or we've gotten our feelings hurt, and somebody will say, I didn't intend to hurt your feelings. Well, they might not have intended to, but they did. We can't say that that was their intention, but we can say, you know what, that did hurt me. But we can explore what's going on with them. We can decide to share the impact that their actions had, find out what they were thinking, and find out what the impact is having on them. Okay. So this is a really big one, I think, that happens a lot. We just make these assumptions all the time that we know, even our partners, even the people we live with, I've lived with him 20 years. I know what he meant. No, you don't. We're not mind readers. We cannot get into other people's heads. If you want to resolve a conflict, then the idea is to go, okay, I'll share how this affected me without blame. It's called blameless discernment. You know, I get that you didn't mean to hurt me. Nonetheless, that's the impact that's had on me. Let's find out what they intended, and let's find out what your impact is having on them so you can resolve it. Now, this seems very simplistic. There's a lot more involved, of course, I know. Okay, blame. So what is the battle when we blame Well, we figure it's all their fault or it's all my fault. So let's take, and we want to prove that they are to blame. That's what we want to prove. But guess what? When you have a pitcher and you have a batter, if somebody strikes out, who's to blame? Or somebody pitches a no-hitter, who's to blame? What if we switch blame to responsibility? Who's responsible? Who would you say is responsible with the pitcher and the batter?
Both parties are playing a role.
Exactly. And that's what a learning conversation is all about. We've both contributed to the situation. It's not an either or kind of thing. So then the goal changes to, well, let's learn how we each contributed so that we can then figure out how to go forward. So unless you have this knowledge and understand the impact, and then want to work on, okay, how did we both contribute? You stay locked in your being a shark or being an avoider or being, you stay locked in those things without trying to move in order to resolve the conflict. And what about feelings? So people often assume that feelings are either irrelevant, so I'm not going to share it, or my feelings are all the other person's fault. and they're going to hear about it. Well, so what do you think the goal is for that? And where is the responsibility? Who are we making responsible? So, okay, so I know those of you who have heard me before know that actually it's really not what somebody says, does, or what you see. It is what our attitude, our perception that makes the difference. So here we have the goal is to avoid talking or to have a huge argument about it because our feelings are running high. This is sometimes where that turtle might come in, right? But it's important that feelings to know that they're usually very complex and they're usually the heart of the situation. When we are engaged in a battle, it's really our feelings are running high. So we can change it to learning if we are allowed, and here's where the owl is helpful, to express feelings without judgment or attributions, and to acknowledge feelings before problem solving. We can't problem solve or resolve a conflict when our feelings are running really high. We need to express them and see if we can understand them, even if we don't agree with them. By the way, acknowledging is not agreement. Okay, we don't have to agree. In all of these changing battles to learning conversations, the idea is what can I learn from this? What can I learn from this? So somebody had mentioned about being empathetic or expressing empathy, and you might have heard of reflective listening before. But empathetic reflective listening takes it a step further. So what if somebody is talking and expressing something, we need to really truly listen, and we need to keep our own mouth shut and not interrupt. This is kind of difficult. We need to just listen. Even often when we listen, how many people listen and we're like all set with our rebuttal, right? I'm gonna, and we're not truly listening. So the not talking is for ourselves. Let's listen mindfully. So we have in any communication, we have a sender and a receiver. And difficulties in communication can happen on either side. Either the sender might not be clear or the receiver might not understand what was said, right? So one way to really help is the mirror technique. So some of the sender's saying whatever they're saying, blah, blah, blah. And then the receiver says, what I heard you say. Okay. And then you go back and forth. You check it out. Is that correct? Did I get your message? Okay. And again, we often make assumptions that we know what they said. We don't unless we check it out. Sometimes we need to ask for more. When we do this, though, we mirror and we do this and take the time, the other person is going to feel heard. And when we feel heard, we're much more willing to collaborate. We're much more willing to share what's going on with us. And that's the only way that we can really resolve conflicts. Does that make sense? Anybody?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the second part of it. So what I heard you say. Now also remember that, and this is important, that 90% of what gets communicated has nothing to do with what we say verbally. What do you think it has to do with?
Our body language?
Yep. Our body language, our
Tone.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Your tone?
Yep, tone of voice. And some of us are much more sensitive to tone of voice than others. I know I am, right? I can hear a tone of voice and I'm like, no, I'm not angry. And I go, well, it sounds like you are, it sounds to me like you are. You think this is shouting? Wait till I really shout, So, yeah, so it's tone of voice, it's our body language. Are we open? Are we closed? You know, now sometimes again, you can't always make assumptions. Sometimes you'll see somebody with their arms crossed and you might think they're closed to what you're saying. They could be cold. Even in the summertime, if the air conditioning is on. So again, that's where we can't always make assumptions, but we can tell somebody the impact that their body language is having on us. It seems like you're not willing to hear what I have to say. Okay, so mirroring can really help with that. Then you check for completeness. Did I get it all? Okay, well, no, you know, you missed this important part of it. So check for completeness. Now, does all of this mean, does it mean agreement? Do you have to agree to have empathetic, reflective listening? No, you do not. You do not have to agree with the other person. But what you want to do, and this is the part where the empathy comes in, you want to validate what they're saying. And what's the difference between that? What is part of validation?
That you're listening, you understand what they're saying.
Yeah. And you can understand, I understand why you might feel that way. It does make sense from your point of view. I've had some interesting conversations with my daughter where I've learned, you know, all sorts of things that she had made assumptions with during her formative years. And I will tell you that in the past, I used to try to convince her that her perception was wrong because that's not what I had intended, right? Now I realize, and we're getting along much better. She's going to be 34 next month. I just validate from your point of view. I could see why you thought that. I wish I I wish I had known that then. I could have done something about that. Now that I know it now, though, what can we do? We just have to move forward, right? There's nothing I can do to change. I'm not even going to try to change her perception of what happened in the past because that's what truth is. Truth is our own perception. Or help me understand. If it doesn't make sense, you can't figure out their point of view, then well, help me understand. Not that you're wrong, but let me validate that your feelings are and your thoughts are valid, even if I don't agree. Help me to understand. That's where empathy comes in. And again, you go back and forth and talking about it. And all you do is say, I can imagine that you might be feeling. We don't know, again, what somebody is feeling. So you don't want to say, oh, you feel blah, blah. But I imagine that you might be feeling. And then you go back and you start reflecting again. Because what if the person says, no, absolutely not. I wasn't hurt by that. Well, then you go back to the beginning, right? And you start this. You start listening, let them talk. Whoop, didn't mean to go back. You mirror what they had to say. You check it out. You ask for more information. And again, this is just on the one level of hearing and listening. And you try to get it all. But feelings, this is where it really, the rubber meets the road. Doesn't mean you agree, but you do validate. Because from their point of view, oh, I guess I can see how you feel that way. So like, I know Lorelei with what's going on politically, this is really difficult. But I do know, I already know that I'm not open to changing my mind about certain things. I know that I'm closed on it, but it can help to hear why somebody else who has a different point of view thinks the way they think. Doesn't mean that we have to be enemies. Right? Because I think we all want what's best. We all want what's best for us. We all want what is best in a relationship. So how do we get there? Has anybody heard of nonviolent communication? This kind of touches on what you're talking about, Lorelei. Marshall Rosenberg, if you ever have a chance to read his works or see him on YouTube, I would encourage you to do it. He actually did this with peace talks in the Middle East. So it is possible. If you can get two sides to listen to each other, this is often the way to do it, is nonviolent communication. This requires observation, which is just the facts, not our judgment, not our interpretation, just what did we see, hear, what did we observe, what did we notice? And then we bring in our feelings. Now, American English has a funny thing about feelings because we often use the word, I feel you're an idiot. Well, that's not a feeling, that's a thought. Basically, there's only 4 root feelings: mad, sad, glad, and afraid. And all the other nuances, and there's a bunch of them. If you want to look up like an emotional wheel, there's so many that come out from that. But those are the 4 basic: mad, sad, glad, and afraid. If you go, I feel blah, blah, and you can put as if or like or that between what comes, I feel, and what comes next. It's a thought, not a feeling. And I'll show you that in a moment. And then we all have different needs. Now, this is Maslow's hierarchies of needs, but we all have different needs, and we can't communicate well if our needs are not met. Needs are different than wants. But this is the area that we have needs in. And just think about needs are what we value. Okay, what's really important at the moment. And then we make a request of what action we want, which is much different than a demand. So how do we put that together? Well, another important thing about nonviolent communication is just to be aware of how we talk. So Rosenberg uses the jackal, and he says that's what we're talking about when we have blame, we're criticizing, judging, or demanding. And that is not the way to communicate with someone if you want to resolve anything. Instead, you demonstrate respect, empathy, attentiveness, and honesty. So here's my giraffe. He sleeps on my bed. And this is also to remind me about how I want to be. Why do we think we use anybody know why Rosenberg used a giraffe? It's just a cute little fact. Giraffes have the biggest heart of any land animal. So it kind of stands for unconditional love. And when we come from that space of unconditional love, we come from that space of being respectful, having empathy, really paying attention, and being honest. So that's what we strive for. So how do we do that? Well, there is a little formula. You might have heard of iMessages before. Start off with when I see, hear, notice, whatever it is. And it's objective, factual observation without evaluation. So if anybody else was in the room at the same time, or a little fly on the wall, they would have noticed the same thing. Okay, without any evaluation or judgment. So when I hear you say blah, 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 and you say it back in their words, or, you know, when I'll give you a real neutral example in a moment. Let me just fill this all out first. So I feel, this is what I meant by I feel, and whatever comes next, you shouldn't be able to put an as if or like I feel like, or I feel as if, then you're talking about a thought. But I feel happy, I feel sad, there's no as if or like that can fit into that sentence. Does that make sense? people, so we're just strictly emotions, no thoughts. Because this is what I want or need, and it generally falls in these categories. And you can say because I want, and underneath a want is usually a need. And how you make a request is would you please, or would you be willing to? You ask without demand. So I'm going to just tell you a story again with my daughter. So she would come home from school and throw her backpack and her coat on the floor in the hallway. Now, mind you, there are hooks right there, but she would throw them down on the floor. And I noticed, and it would bother me. And if I just said, wow, I feel you're such a slob, or I feel you don't care anything about me. No, that wouldn't go anywhere. But I could say, okay, and what I noticed was, this is what was interesting. I would get more upset when I had just cleaned the house than I did on other days. The same action, but I could say, okay, when you come home from school and you put your backpack and your coat on the floor instead of hanging them up, I feel irritated, I feel discounted, I feel upset. I mean, this is not that big of a deal, but I could tell her how I felt, right? Instead of I feel you're a slob. If I said I feel you're a slob, that's my thought behind it. Because I want or need, well, I felt because I want to keep the house clean. Now, why is that a need? Well, you know what? I worked on keeping the house clean that day. It makes me feel good about myself when my house is clean. You see how it ends up being an esteem issue, right? So would you be willing to hang up your coat and backpack when you come into the house? Now, did that mean she would always do it? No, but at least we didn't get into an argument. It's a very neutral, non-threatening example. You can see the difference, right? So when we can approach people with, when I see, hear, or notice, and we're just objective, factual, without any kind of negativity in our voices, when this is what I hear or notice, you say, or I heard, or what I noticed, this is how I feel, because, and there's always a reason, we generally feel hurt and upset or angry because a need has not been met. So kind of look at, what's my need? Okay. Like, what was my need about a backpack being thrown on the floor? Well, it did affect, I worked to clean the house, right? And then, would you please do this? When you say do such and such, it's not it can be a demand. And how do you know it's a demand? It's not only just asking politely, but if you would be really, really upset if they don't honor your request, then you know it was not a request, it was a demand. So this is a way to communicate with people so that you can change those battle conversations into learning conversations. You use reflective listening, you use non-communication skills, you change your assumptions, you recognize their conflict style, which is neither bad nor good, it's just different on a continuum, and your own conflict style. And what can you do so that you can be more open and have greater conversations with the other person so that you're not closing them off? Because we're not responsible and we can't change how other people act or what they say. We can only change what we do. And that's the whole point of changing from a battle conversation to a learning conversation. So sometimes it's not that easy and we need some help to do that, whether it's with me or somebody else, but this is what somebody working with you can help you with. Often it's very hard to see things objectively because we've been seeing it from our point of view for so long. And there are healthy ways to communicate so that you can get back to a sense of well-being, because that's the heart of everything. So if anybody, I do have handouts if anybody wants them. There's like one goes into the reflective listening with empathy in more detail. And I hope that you all got something out of this that you can use in your lives, in your work, and with your personal relationships as well.
I have some people that I would like to have hear this conversation, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I'd be glad to. If you want me to present for some people, I'd be glad to.
I'm not sure they'd be very receptive, but yeah. But I wouldn't mind having the handout.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm always interested in things about communication. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Can I get the handout too, please?
I'm sorry, I was looking down. Who said that?
I did. Lisa.
Oh, Lisa, where are you? Here you are, Lisa. Okay. Anybody else?
Lorelei.
Lorelei? All
Yes.
righty. So nice to hear from you again, Lorelei. It's been a while.
Yes, I need to have this conversation with the family at Thanksgiving.
Yes. You know what? Everyone's like, oh, yay, holidays. And we're going, oh, no, holidays.
Oh.
All right. Yeah, I'll be glad. Kate was kind enough to give me your emails. I don't think I have Shay and Ashley's. I don't know if you're still here. But I'll be glad to send it. Okay.
Trudy, I would like to have the handout too.
Okay, Pam.
And Ashley would also like one, please.
Okay, what's your email address? Because I don't have
Oh.
that.
You can put it in the chat.
I'll put it in the chat for you.
Thank you.
We'll see if I will.
You know what? let me-
Trudy, I was taking notes and I didn't get C and D on that last screen.
I'm sorry, say that again.
The C and D on the last screen.
The C and D.
I got to see things more objectively, to clarify, but I
I'm
didn't write
sorry,
fast
C and
enough.
D.
Thank you.
Okay, I apologize. I didn't know if you meant this one. Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Kate, I can't see you. Are you getting what's in the chat? Because I'll have to stop sharing to see what's
Yep, I've got you.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Okay, well, again, I appreciate you guys taking your time out of your busy days, eating your lunch during, a presentation and whatever. So I hope that you found this useful and you can get started on helping us. We all need to be more empathetic and care about each other. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you, Trudy.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay. Good to meet some of you and to see some of you again, or to hear some of you again. It's okay,
Thanks,
Laura.
everyone.
I recognize your voice anywhere.
Okay,
right.
bye.
Take care.